Cyan often reflected on his father's stern advice, dedicating one's life to upholding the honor of the family name. His father had always intended for Cyan to desire nothing more than to attend to his older brother, Ishel, like a loyal shadow. This principle had guided Cyan's actions and decisions throughout his life, shaping his sense of duty and loyalty. However, the present situation was dire. Cyan found himself slumped on the ground, surrounded by the formidable Knights of Light. He pondered internally that it had indeed come to this point, a culmination of tensions and unresolved conflicts. Amidst the tension, one man stepped forward, his voice filled with awe. He remarked that witnessing such an extraordinary sight was priceless. A lone knight holding his own against the fiercest warrior of the continent was truly a marvel. The man continued, recognizing Cyan as his lord's younger brother, and called out his name, Lord Cyan Vert. Cyan responded with the name Boris. Despite being a member of the Order of Light, Boris bore a foul grin, his demeanor unsettling in the current moment. Summoning his crimson-purple dagger from the shadows, Cyan held it firmly despite his tattered body and the blood that oozed from his internal injuries. His presence was menacing, a stark contrast to the order he was part of. Cyan questioned whether the Emperor had ordered Boris's actions, his mind racing to understand the motives behind this betrayal. Boris feigned surprise, covering his mouth as if he had been unaware of the sinister rumors surrounding the vile black mist. Cyan's suspicions deepened, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fit together. In that instant, Cyan rose to his feet, releasing a black aura that emanated from him, sharp and threatening to anyone who dared approach. Boris seized the opportunity to accuse Cyan of being an assassin belonging to the mist, a fog that cast a pall over the Order of Light. He declared his intention to report Cyan as a heretical rebel, his voice dripping with disdain. Cyan responded with a stern warning, threatening Boris with severe consequences. The tension between them escalated as Boris announced that escaping using a secret technique was impossible, revealing that he had cast a level 9 star magic barrier. Cyan's determination solidified. He knew he had to find a way to inform his brother and uncover who was truly behind these events. He declared his intent to raise everything, to destroy Boris and whatever plans he had in motion. Suddenly, a single word from Ishel carried more meaning than simple statements, causing Cyan to freeze in place as he realized the voice's origin. Memories of his father's advice echoed in Cyan's mind, dedicating his life to the family's honor and recognizing Ishel's success as his own. Yet, Ishel stood before him now, shrouded in mystery and accusation. Cyan understood that Ishel was the one orchestrating these events. His dark energy dispersed, and he fell to the ground, feeling defeated. Ishel expressed that Cyan's eyes revealed his lack of understanding regarding the situation. Cyan muttered in confusion, trying to grasp the gravity of Ishel's words. Ishel praised him for performing his duties well, for the family name, the people, and himself. Shock overwhelmed Cyan as Ishel revealed that he had shouldered the weight of their duty for decades and was now there to lift that burden from Cyan's shoulders. Cyan questioned if he had done something wrong, his hand clutching the dagger tightly. Ishel accused him of becoming a vile murderer under the influence of the sinister fog, deceiving everyone and committing heinous sins. Cyan grappled with these accusations, gritting his teeth at Ishel's harsh words. He thought about the numerous conflicts they had faced together. The feud over the imperial crown, the suppression of the demon army, the war for the unification of the continent, and how he had assisted Ishel in succeeding in all their endeavors. Dedicating his life to Ishel had also been for his own good, but now it seemed he was being cast aside without reason. Determined to confront the betrayal, Cyan mustered his dark energy, blood flowing from his wounds, and vowed to destroy Ishel. His aura radiated outward, filling the canyon with an oppressive darkness. A knight exclaimed that Cyan's magic was beyond human, recognizing the immense power he wielded. Undeterred, Cyan provoked Ishel, questioning how a supposed great hero could fear his own younger brother. Ishel, visibly angered, remained silent as Cyan approached with assassin-like speed. Cyan delivered 2 swift strikes, but Ishel effortlessly blocked them with his sword, the clanging of their weapons echoing through the canyon. Moving with calculated precision, Cyan circled around, believing that a single hit to a vital point would end the confrontation. He launched another attack, but Ishel remained unfazed, his composure unbroken. The clash continued, with Cyan's shadow energy intertwining with Boris's light power as it defended Ishel from behind. He marveled at Cyan's formidable magic, unable to comprehend its extent. Ishel dismissed his brother as a poor fool, swiftly stabbing Cyan in the abdomen and causing him to lose grip of his dagger. Ishel expressed regret, hoping for a peaceful resolution, as Cyan reverted back in surprise, losing his power and his grip on reality. Ishel kicked Cyan away effortlessly, treating him like worthless trash. Cyan watched helplessly as his brother walked away, his breath shallow and labored. He reflected on his seemingly foolish life as his eyes began to close. Summoning his last ounce of strength, Cyan dashed toward Ishel, his dagger inches from Ishel's neck. Ishel swiftly swung his sword, releasing a surge of light power to finish Cyan once and for all. A voice called out to Cyan from his dark consciousness, jolting him awake. He gasped for air, sweat dripping profusely as he realized his neck was intact. Looking up, he saw a maid screaming at him to get ready. Emily stood before him, surprising Cyan. It had been nearly 20 years since he had seen her, and she hadn't changed a bit. Recognizing his room and the childhood furniture, Cyan realized he had somehow become a young boy again. The room around him was familiar, triggering memories that felt both distant and immediate. Emily called out to him once more, mentioning a sparring match. Confused, Cyan recalled being back at the castle of the House of Duke Vert. He saw himself in proper attire, holding a sword, standing in an arena watched by an eager crowd. Memories flooded back to March 1st, 985 since creation, a day before he was to enter the academy. He remembered the sparring matches, the importance of the event observed personally by his father, Duke Vert. His opponent had been Cyan Vert, his half-brother, who received more attention despite Cyan being the youngest of 4 sons. As an illegitimate child, Cyan's humiliation in the match had made him a laughingstock among his peers. His father's harsh words after losing the match had marked the end of his father's interest in him, deepening his sense of isolation. Emily approached him, suggesting he forfeit the match, but Cyan insisted he would win. Feeling hopeless, as even his maid thought so, Cyan drew his rapier, feeling its weight. He realized this was not a dream or an illusion and questioned if he had truly gone back to his past. The gravity of the situation settled in as he faced Cyan, who was amused by Cyan's unexpected presence. Ignoring the provocation, Cyan awaited the command to begin. Cyan lunged with his sword, insulting Cyan as a half-wit. Cyan observed Cyan's slow movements and swiftly shifted his leg, causing Cyan's strike to miss and clang against the ground. Cyan accused Cyan of dodging like a coward, but Cyan swiftly disarmed him, kicking his leg and causing Cyan to tumble to the ground in pain. Margaret cried over her son's injury, while Duke Vert watched in surprise at Cyan's effortless movements. Cyan contemplated ending the match by pointing his blade at Cyan's throat, but decided instead to defeat him decisively to prevent future harassment. Possessing nearly 40 years of experience in a 10-year-old body, Cyan was determined to live for himself. He kicked Cyan to the ground, securing a crushing defeat that left a lasting impression on his father. Cyan had suffered a crushing defeat in the sparring match, prompting the Duke to postpone his previously planned journey in order to meet with his son. The performance in the match must have left quite an impression. Cyan walked through the hall toward his father's office, his thoughts occupied by the unexpected turn of events. Even the Duke's personal high knight and bodyguard, Jerkin, had been assigned to escort him. A slight turn of the head acknowledged the knight's presence. Along the way, Margaret appeared in the hallway. She had likely just come from the infirmary because of her son. A quiet amusement flickered in Cyan's mind. Her expression was one of barely contained fury. A grin formed as he addressed her, feigning concern for Cyan's well-being. Margaret's scowl deepened as she responded with seething contempt. The audacity to ask such a thing after what had been done to his own brother was beyond brazen. With an air of indifference, Cyan dismissed the accusation, stating that it had merely been a sparring match. Without waiting for further protest, he moved to walk past her. Margaret, however, refused to let the moment pass unchallenged. A sneer accompanied her words as she declared the folly of associating with those beneath one's station. The provocation did not stop there. A remark about his lineage, laced with venom, followed, one that crossed an unforgivable line. A sharp halt signaled that Cyan had stopped in his tracks. The words reverberated in his mind. Killing intent surged, dark and immediate. She had overstepped. Should she die for it? Yet, just as quickly, the dangerous impulse subsided. Instead, a grin formed once more. There existed a far more satisfying way to make her suffer. One that would unfold gradually, ensuring that misery clung to her at every step. With an almost casual tone, he shifted the conversation. A reminder was issued. Krantz would be entering the academy alongside him. Margaret's response held a note of unease as she demanded to know his intent. The smirk remained. Surely, she wanted Krantz to graduate with all his limbs intact. The provocation was returned tenfold. Margaret's patience snapped. The vile words spoken with such insolence were intolerable. Anger propelled her hand forward, intent on delivering a slap. Jurken's presence, however, disrupted the motion. Without hesitation, the knight stepped between them. With unwavering composure, he addressed the Duchess, offering a respectful yet firm reminder that the Duke was waiting. The matter could not be delayed further. With a final, formal dismissal, Jurken ensured that the conversation had reached its end. Margaret fumed, but no further protest could be made. The Duke's orders were absolute. A quiet snicker escaped as the realization settled. The protection of a knight who answered only to the Duke held undeniable value. Even the Duchess held no sway over him. Before long, Cyan stood before his father. A formal greeting was issued. The youngest of the house of Vert stood in the presence of the Duke. A simple command followed. The Duke instructed him to sit. 15 years had passed since a conversation in private had last taken place. Duke Williers Vert, the great lord of Valias, ruler of the western territory of the Wuzif Empire. The guardian of the continent. The great hero, whose powerful magic and strategic mind had halted the advance of the demons. A man who had taken on a duty no one had asked him to bear. Even until the moment of his death during the Demon King's invasion, his only wish had been peace for the continent. Yet, the memories of him were somewhat different. He had chosen a life of service to others, a life that, in the end, made him nothing more than a fool. As Cyan took his seat, that thought lingered. A past life had already provided its judgment. Williers, Cyan's father, expressed admiration for Cyan's swordsmanship, noting how Cyan had dodged a sword with precise anticipation. Cyan felt a moment of confusion in response. Williers clarified his observation, explaining that when Krantz had lunged at Cyan, he had seen the trajectory of Krantz's rapier and had turned just enough to evade it. Curious, Williers inquired when he had learned such swordsmanship. Nervously, Cyan responded that he hadn't received formal training, but had trained by himself every night. Internally, he marveled at his father's perceptiveness. Williers exclaimed that the Cyan he knew had no aptitude or interest in swordsmanship and questioned how Cyan had managed to conceal such talent. Cyan admitted that he had simply avoided drawing attention to himself, scratching his head in response. Williers acknowledged Cyan's masterful maneuver against Krantz, despite his desire for privacy. Williers then questioned whether Cyan thought his subsequent actions were excessive, referring to how Cyan had repeatedly kicked Krantz down instead of securing a quick victory with a simple sword point to Krantz's neck. Deep in thought, Cyan considered whether his father was attempting to judge his character. He admitted his desire to prove himself. Williers sought clarification on what Cyan meant by proving himself. Cyan explained that although they might be half-brothers, he believed he was superior to Krantz and had concluded that this was the true purpose of their sparring matches. Surprised, Cyan watched as his father chuckled at his answer. Williers expressed delight at Cyan's sharp and straightforward response, stating how overjoyed he was to see such talent in his son. He added that Cyan would be of great assistance to Ishel someday. Cyan was taken aback, his mind filled with horror at the mention of Ishel. He recalled how his older brother had stabbed him, the very person who had betrayed him despite their shared dedication to Ishel. Cyan realized that nothing had changed. His father was still obsessed with Ishel. Although still a child, Cyan remained silent, clenching his fist in frustration. Williers offered to give Cyan something for winning the match, suggesting that the term prize might not be quite right, and asked what Cyan would like. Stealing his conviction, Cyan declared that if that was how it was going to be, he would destroy everything that Ishel set out to do. He then expressed his desire to go to the front lines. Back in his room, Emily screamed in shock at Cyan's decision to go to the front lines. Cyan revealed that he had informed his father, but nothing had been decided yet. Emily responded angrily. accusing him of going insane and questioning his understanding of the dangers that awaited. She cried in horror, recalling conversations with maids that described the front lines as crawling with hideous, evil demon beasts. Cyan explained that their territory was Velias, the westernmost region of the Wuzif Empire, the only area referred to as the front lines. The foremost area was Lemia Valley, where the centuries-long war against the demons continued to rage. He revealed that his father had been vehemently against his going there, but had eventually consented on the condition that he become qualified to go to Lemia Valley within a month. Looking at his palm, Cyan thought about not yet knowing what the qualification entailed. He clenched his fist, steeling his resolve, and decided that the first step would be to build as much muscle as possible, as he was still much weaker compared to his peers. Recalling the fight against Krantz, Cyan felt fortunate that he still possessed his battle instincts from his previous life. A dark crimson aura emanated from his hand as he sensed a bit of magic within his body. He believed he could make good use of that magic if he trained his body and decided to start training immediately. Suddenly, the door to his room was forcefully opened, and a soft, clear voice called out his name. Cyan saw Alice, with a pair of sky-blue eyes and straight hair with a braid on the side of her head, who appeared angry for some reason. Alice abruptly grabbed Cyan's collar and shook his thin, fragile body. Emily greeted Alice, hoping she had been well. Alice screamed at Cyan, questioning whether he had really told their father that he wanted to go to the front lines. Cyan pleaded with his sister to let him go first. Alice expressed that Cyan must think of himself as a real warrior just because he had beaten Krantz in a sparring match and demanded she wouldn't allow him to go to the front lines. She ordered him to the rooftop, but Cyan knew she was merely concerned about him and wanted to demonstrate how harsh the front line was. Cyan had no choice but to concede. With his rapier tied to his waist, he stood before Alice, who had her own long sword ready. She declared that the moment their swords were drawn, if Cyan could withstand her attacks for 3 minutes, she would allow him to go to the front lines. Wearing a weary expression, Cyan questioned whether this was truly necessary. Alice dismissed his question, instead asking whether he was interested in carrying on the family name. Cyan thought to himself that this was the real issue and had zero interest in it. Alice took Cyan's silence as affirmation. Cyan drew his rapier, his face down, thinking to himself that sparring with Krantz had already made the day quite eventful. With light steps, Alice lunged with her sword drawn, attempting an attack. Cyan was surprised by her speed, but effortlessly blocked her strike. Alice was bewildered, wondering how a 10-year-old could block it. Cyan pondered whether Alice was truly not going to hold back against a brother 7 years younger than her. Alice abruptly jumped back, and a skidding sound echoed as her legs slipped on the floor. She marveled in shock at how he had parried her long sword with his thin rapier, her hand quivering as she realized the possibility of it being just a fluke. Her killing intent surged, and she remarked that Cyan was better than she had expected. Horror descended upon Cyan as he saw the seriousness in his sister's demeanor. He thought to himself that he was in trouble and tried to plead with Alice. A fierce exchange of sword strikes followed, accompanied by the repeated clanging of metal. Cyan, with his frail, thin body, blocked every strike from his 17-year-old sister's barrage of attacks. Alice jumped up, her arms stretched back, preparing for a heavy downward sword strike. Cyan raised his rapier, meeting the blade head-on. He then tilted his rapier slightly as it ran along her blade. Having lived as an assassin his entire life, Cyan's instincts took over. Entering the battle, his instinct was to take a life. His sword moved straight toward Alice's neck, but she failed to respond. At that moment, Cyan executed a technique to twist his sword, redirecting his attack towards Alice. Alice was very surprised, but she didn't hesitate. She swiftly knocked aside Cyan's sword and stepped back. Cyan also retreated, thinking it could have been disastrous had he not twisted his sword midway. He realized that without doing so, he would have killed her. Cyan's swordsmanship skills were primarily designed for lethal combat, making it immediately difficult to fight without intending to kill, especially since his strength was lacking. He wondered how much time remained of the 3 minutes. To compensate for his weak strength, he imbued his sword with mana, but he was almost at his limit. In anger, Alice began to chant a spell to enhance her sword's power. Earth and wind responded, merging with her sword. Cyan was surprised and afraid of her 6-star magic. Alice's entire sword was now enveloped in mana from multiple elements. Cyan feared she was trying to kill him and realized it was over, noticing the determined look in her eyes. Alice seemed to have lost her will to dominate a child, repeating in her mind that she couldn't lose. Fearful, Cyan thought he would fall out of the castle even if he tried to block her attack. He just had to trust that this would work. After carefully considering, Cyan rushed towards Alice. Alice stood before him, gathering mana into her sword, causing it to soar high into the sky. Cyan prayed silently for Jurkin to come out. Just as Alice's dangerously large sword was about to reach Cyan, the knight of the family appeared, demanding to stop everything. He deflected Alice's attack with his sword and lifted Cyan with his other hand. The force of the collision lit up the night sky. With a serious expression, he warned Miss Alice that she was being too harsh against a much younger opponent. Cyan sighed in relief, thinking he had been wondering when the knight would appear. Alice immediately sobered up, hugged Cyan, and apologized, explaining that she must have lost her mind for a second there. She added that she had just wanted to stop him from going to the battlefield and had become too obsessed with it. Cyan thought cheerfully that this was very like her. She always tried so hard with everything. He added that his sister was the elite of the elites, having achieved an S in all subjects at the Royal Academy, where all the talented children gathered, whether they were skilled in swordsmanship, magic, or other fields of study. On top of her astounding beauty, people called Alice God's child. From a young age, she was trained in swordsmanship and was recognized as the future guardian of the continent alongside the eldest son, Ishel. However, not long after joining the Knights of Light, she was killed. Cyan thought to himself that he missed Alice and vowed to protect her this time. Alice turned to him and remarked that now that she thought about it, he was the Duke's guardian knight, but the Duke had just left for the war. Jurkin responded that he was carrying out the Duke's orders to protect the young master for a while, adding that he couldn't reveal this because he was supposed to carry it out in secret. Cyan reflected that he had felt Jurkin's presence ever since leaving the Duke's office and wondered why his father had instructed Jurkin to act secretly, thinking that if Jurkin had continued to ignore him, he would not have shown himself. Sensing her baby brother's feelings, Alice smiled happily, noting that he was still like a little kid to her. The next day, Alice returned to the academy. Apparently, Alice had returned briefly to see their father before her graduation. During this time, Cyan was struggling to push beyond his limits by attempting to perform push-ups, managing only 10 before trembling. He needed to become stronger, so he had been focusing on strength training for the past 2 weeks, but 10 push-ups remained his limit. For the past 2 weeks, he had been hitting a wall, despite being pretty confident in his strength. Now, he desired to return to his former strength and needed a solution. Emily entered the room and announced that a package had arrived from Miss Alice. Cyan confirmed with joy at the news, but Emily, with a disgusted and pinched expression, questioned the contents, noting the foul smell. She realized it was Hellhound's blood that Alice had requested. It was a rare item found only in Lemia Valley, but the rumors of its presence in the black market were true. The blood of demonic beasts was considered poisonous due to its sickening smell and the burning sensation upon consumption. However, it actually permanently increased the mana and strength of the person who consumed it. Most people believed it was just a false rumor, but Cyan knew it was true from his past life experience. Emily asked the young master if he was really going to drink that. Cyan replied with a smile that he was the only person able to adapt to her cooking skills. He reminisced about the first time, which was mushroom soup, and a smirk played on his lips as he thought his heart had stopped for a moment after a single bite of that thing compared to the Hellhound's blood. It was nothing. After finishing the Hellhound's blood, he slammed the container down on the table and shouted loudly that it was good. He then called for Emily, who responded that she was going to go for a walk. Cyan announced that he would return to see if it worked. Walking through the forest, Cyan thought it had been a while since he had come here and that he had been waiting for this day for the last 2 weeks. The moment when Jurkin was not around for his regular reports, as he kept following Cyan around, which was annoying since Cyan often came to this place when he wanted to be alone. He recalled that one day, Ishel had received a divine revelation from the god of light, Lumendal, which stated that an ancient temple was hidden somewhere in these mountains. Although Cyan hadn't fully believed it, he realized that there was indeed a place where the flow of mana was concentrated. Since the divine revelation had yet to arrive, it seemed that Cyan was the only one who knew about this at the moment. Pressing his hand down on the ground, Cyan used mana to give out a sense of presence, causing the surrounding area to collapse. He laughed joyfully, thinking of Ishel, and mused that she couldn't even imagine what he was doing at that moment. Looking down, he saw a staircase descending into the ground with a light at the end. It seemed like the temple was nearby, and with determination, Cyan decided to enter. He noted that it was different from the last time he had been here, muttering to himself as he took in his surroundings. The place was an ancient temple that had once served the god of light, Lumendal, until all history on this land was erased due to the god-demon war that had happened 300 years ago. Who could have imagined such a place hidden in the mountains just behind the castle? Cyan observed it now, the remnants of a temple whose origins seemed rooted in the distant year 999 before creation. On August 12th of that year, humanity had achieved a monumental victory, driving out the Demon King's army from Velius. Despite being far weaker, humans had unearthed ancient relics, artifacts known as the weapons of the gods, that had tipped the scales in their favor. Among these relics was Duran Dark, a holy sword blessed by Lumendal, the god of light. This weapon had been heralded as the key to humanity's triumph over the demons. Cyan's future, however, held a bitter irony, as it was destined to bring about his demise, wielded by a Cyan Vert. Perhaps this very sword had a role in Cyan's inexplicable regression. Reaching out, he touched the holy blade, its surface smooth and unyielding. As expected, there was no response. The absence of any reaction soured his mood, stirring a fleeting annoyance. It seemed the sword held no interest in him, and he dismissed it, silently vowing to focus on the task at hand. Continuing past the light of the altar, his attention was drawn to a shadow lurking nearby. Its presence felt otherworldly, impossible to ignore. At first glance, one might mistake it for the sword shadow, but its origin was far more complex. Light and darkness coexisted, and the shadow concealed a hidden pathway beneath the altar. Descending the newly revealed staircase, Cyan encountered a door shrouded in mystery. He opened it cautiously and stepped inside. Before him stood a sword bathed in a bloody red aura. It radiated immense magical power, distorting the air around it. Cyan's expression twisted into one of joy as he reached for it. This was Kiram, his magic sword. Addressing the weapon, he acknowledged its dormant state, his voice calm, yet edged with anticipation. The silence was broken by a grotesque voice emanating from the blade, mocking him for his lack of fear and questioning his audacity in awakening it. Darkness surged forward, aiming to engulf him entirely. Unfazed, Cyan caught the encroaching shadow with one hand, halting its advance. The darkness shifted form, coalescing into the shape of a woman. Her attempt to retreat was futile as Cyan's gaze locked onto her. His smile brimmed with a chilling intensity. She demanded to know how he had touched her. Disbelief etched into her face. Cyan dismissed her questions, calmly asserting his claim over the sword. She spat in defiance, lunging at him with her claws, only for him to evade her attack effortlessly. As the battle unfolded, her disbelief grew. She demanded answers, sensing the unmistakable presence of Air's aura surrounding him. Cyan confirmed her suspicions, declaring himself the successor of Air and commanding her submission. The demonic sword, now furious, launched a ferocious assault, her attacks growing faster and more relentless. Cyan's thoughts remained steady, calculating. Words had proven futile, and he knew Kiram's ultimate goal was to claim his body. Deciding to assert his dominance, Cyan stepped back and issued a command: sword manipulation. Instantly, Kiram's form stiffened, her movements ceasing entirely. As she collapsed, he offered her a final warning, suggesting she accept him as her master while he still retained a modicum of patience. Restrained and unable to move, Kiram's thoughts raced, wondering how Cyan could wield the incantation with such precision. Despite her defiance, Cyan repeated the command with unwavering authority. Each utterance of demonic sword control pressed her head further into the ground, forcing submission. With a final, begrudging tone, Kiram conceded, her resistance giving way as she addressed him as master. Cyan acknowledged her submission with little more than a glance. His thoughts turned to his next move. He had accomplished his purpose here and considered whether it was time to return. He realized he had been away for far too long. As he exited the basement, Kiram's voice broke the silence, filled with relief and curiosity. She remarked on the freshness of the air, marveling at how invigorating it felt after so long. She addressed him playfully, asking for his name. Without hesitation, he responded, introducing himself as Cyan Vert. Her confusion was immediate, expressing disbelief at the unfamiliar name. She questioned how Air could have chosen someone so young. Cyan remained unperturbed, casually confirming that he had been chosen, though his connection with Air came from his past life. Kiram, taken aback, demanded clarification, but Cyan simply stated that he had died once before. Her shock deepened, and she glanced at the holy sword nearby, noting its dormant state. He explained that the sword's owner would not awaken for another 20 years, a revelation that left her questioning how he seemed to know the future with such certainty. Without offering much explanation, Cyan firmly gripped his dagger and, with decisive force, severed its handle. Kiram's reaction was immediate, a mixture of surprise and fear. She demanded to know what he planned to do with the broken handle. Cyan's response came with a sly, devious smile, suggesting that it might make the future more interesting. Time passed swiftly, and the day of departure arrived. That afternoon, a carriage rolled away from the ancestral mansion. Cyan, now clad in armor, reflected on how quickly the moment had come. Time, it seemed, had moved faster than expected. As the convoy arrived, Cyan approached, offering formal greetings to the Duke. Turning to Cyan, the Duke asked one final question, giving him an opportunity to reconsider. He assured Cyan that he would not stop him if he chose to withdraw. Cyan bowed respectfully, his resolve unshaken. He replied with certainty that his heart already belonged to the battlefront. Accepting this, the Duke ordered his knight, Jurkin, to proceed. Jurkin obeyed, producing a magic scroll. As the scroll activated, a glowing magic circle illuminated the area, summoning a fearsome beast. A creature with a fiery body emerged from the light, its bloodthirsty gaze fixed on Cyan. It was a hellhound, a low-ranked demonic beast native to Lemia Valley. Cyan observed the knights and his father, noting the effort they must have invested in preparing this test. Gripping his sword tightly, he reassured himself that they would step in if the situation became too dangerous. The Duke, standing watch, reminded him of the weight of responsibility. Every action carried consequence, and the trial before him was meant to demonstrate the strength of his resolve. As the word trial lingered in Cyan's mind, he recalled a recent conversation with Jurkin about arranging a duel. With only 3 days left to fulfill his promise to his father, he knew aimlessly practicing sword swings would not suffice. He had sought a real fight to hone his skills. Jurkin had suggested someone of Cyan's age, like young Master Krantz, as a potential opponent. However, Cyan dismissed the idea, mentioning that Krantz always seemed to avoid him. The hassle of chasing him down was not worth the effort. Jurkin, after some hesitation, agreed to spar instead, though he clarified he would use only a sheathed sword and focus solely on defense. Cyan had instructed him not to inform the Duke of the arrangement, emphasizing that it was an order. As the sparring began, Cyan launched an aggressive attack. Jurkin, wielding his sheathed sword, found himself astounded by the strength behind Cyan's strikes. Despite being only 10 years old, Cyan displayed remarkable speed and power. Jurkin thought to himself how heavy the blows felt, struggling to reconcile them with the age of his opponent. Cyan's movements grew sharper and more unpredictable, vanishing from Jurkin's line of sight in a mere instant. Jurkin, momentarily distracted, was caught off guard as Cyan reappeared behind him, delivering another strike. Though Jurkin remained stationary, focused purely on defense, the sheer intensity of Cyan's swordsmanship left him astonished. Cyan acknowledged his limits, silently admitting that defeating Jurkin was beyond his current ability. Still, the sparring session had served its purpose. Concluding the duel, Cyan expressed his gratitude. Jurkin, equally impressed, praised Cyan's progress. Internally, Jurkin marveled at the transformation of the young master he had once considered weak. If his earlier suspicions had been correct, Cyan's growth meant he could now face any trial with confidence. Returning to the present, Cyan stood before a massive monster, prepared for the next stage of his training. In an instant, his body disappeared from its original position, his swift movements propelling him toward the creature. A moment later, he reappeared, having delivered a powerful strike as he passed by. Despite the impact, Cyan recognized that his current strength was insufficient for prolonged combat against such a foe. Determined to avoid being overwhelmed, he resolved to end the battle as quickly as possible. Cyan advanced with determination, channeling his energy into the sword in his right hand. He leaped high into the air, a powerful surge of focus guiding his movements. With precision, he thrust the blade downwards, piercing the monster's head. The scene unfolded with awe. The sheer force of the attack left the onlookers in silence. His father's face brightened with pride as Cyan stood over the fallen beast. Cyan's thoughts wandered momentarily, amused by the idea of bottling the abundant blood spilling from the creature. Yet, he dismissed the notion, aware of how odd such an act would seem to those around him. The Duke's applause broke the quiet, his voice filled with approval as he commended Cyan's skill. He declared his readiness to see Cyan at the battlefront. Cyan acknowledged his father's words with gratitude, standing firm in his resolve. Kiram's voice interrupted the moment, tinged with irritation. The sword spirit expressed disdain, likening itself to a mere kitchen knife in Cyan's hands. Cyan responded with measured reassurance, reminding Kiram of its true nature as a demonic sword. Kiram's plea for blood to regain strength was met with Cyan's promise of future use, a promise that carried an edge of anticipation. Transitioning to the battlefield, chaos erupted as a group of ogres launched an attack. The soldiers responded swiftly, organizing a defensive line to counter the threat. Magic users cast spells, their radiant light forcing the ogres to recoil. Threads of binding magic emerged from smaller circles, immobilizing the creatures. With the command to strike, the army unleashed its full might upon the restrained ogres, overwhelming them with precision and force. A warrior charged into the fray, decapitating an ogre with a swift stroke. The severed head landed near Cyan, who observed the scene from atop his horse. Emily, his maid, stood behind him, trembling with fear. She questioned Cyan's decision to be present in such a perilous place, her voice betraying her anxiety. Cyan, however, viewed the unfolding battle with a mix of nostalgia and unease, recalling the familiarity of such chaos. The Duke approached, asking Cyan how he felt witnessing the front lines. Cyan admitted to some nervousness, but resolved to remain vigilant. His father's reminder of the ever-present danger resonated deeply, and Cyan's confident smile masked his growing determination. As the battle subsided, Cyan's assigned tent provided a semblance of safety at the rear of the encampment. Reflecting on his surroundings, he noted the disciplined guards and considered the delay in feeding Kiram. Frustration simmered as he contemplated his restricted circumstances. Emily's bustling presence provided little comfort. Her insistence on staying by his side grated on his nerves. To prepare for his departure, Cyan left a doll resembling himself on his bed. Emily's inquiry about his intentions revealed her suspicion of his plans. Cyan's reply, cloaked in casual dismissal, did little to quell her concerns. Donning his cloak, he stepped out into the night, his swift movements carrying him toward his next endeavor. Due to the heightened night guard duties on the front lines, moving freely was a challenge. Cyan executed the skill of the Black Mist, third move, Misty's Descent. He recalled that the area was filled with monsters, making it an ideal opportunity to wield Kiram. The demonic sword, sensing the strong scent of blood, grew restless and urged Cyan to let it cut something down. At that moment, a pack of hellhounds charged towards Cyan. He acknowledged Kiram's eagerness and decided to proceed. Using the skill Mist Blade, Misty Tempest, Cyan maneuvered through the hellhound pack with lethal precision, leaving their bodies lifeless in his wake. Afterward, at the corpse of one of the hellhounds, he inserted a sharp tube into a blood vessel, allowing the blood to flow into a wooden cup. He drank it heartily, expressing satisfaction with the quality of the blood. Kiram, too, expressed its refreshment and eagerness to grow stronger. Cyan evaluated their progress, assuring Kiram that the night was still young and the area teeming with monsters. Before them, another herd of beasts awaited. Kiram's excitement grew as they prepared for the next confrontation. Elsewhere, a group of horse-drawn carriages traveled. Within one sat a young lady with white hair. A companion expressed concern about the dangers of the front lines, suggesting they turn back. The young lady, the royal princess of the empire, dismissed the suggestion firmly. She reiterated her duty to assist her father on his tours and warned against further attempts to dissuade her. The conversation shifted to news of the youngest son of the Vert family being on the front lines. It was mentioned that the boy had volunteered himself, and the princess was encouraged to get along with him since they were of the same age. However, she dismissed this as trivial and decided to rest. Before falling asleep, she learned his name, Cyan Vert. On the battlefield, the Vert family fought against monsters. A bird-shaped creature fell to their attacks as the battle concluded. The Lord called for a status check, and the soldiers confirmed no injuries. Pleased, the Lord commended their efforts and instructed them to return to camp. His attention was briefly drawn to something unusual. Meanwhile, Cyan finished off another monster and sheathed his sword. His father approached, inquiring about his adjustment to life on the front lines. Cyan responded respectfully, noting that he was learning something new every day. Surprised, his father acknowledged Cyan's perseverance and expressed pride in him. This unexpected praise left Cyan deep in thought. Before leaving, his father mentioned wanting to discuss something the next morning and instructed Cyan to come to his tent. Later that night, in the monster territory, the sounds of movement and attacks echoed. A large monster attacked from underground, prompting Cyan to evade and observe. It was a deathworm, a creature that usually resided deeper in the valley. Kiram suggested taking over, pointing out the creature's regenerative abilities that rendered shallow injuries ineffective. Cyan, aware of Kiram's potential schemes, hesitated but ultimately agreed. The fusion process began as Cyan activated Black Mist, 9th form, magical sword manifestation. His body became enveloped in dark, blood-like energy. In a blur of sharp strikes, the deathworm's body was shredded. Merging with Kiram and channeling their power beneath the seemingly crimson moon, Cyan executed Mist Blade, 8th form, fluttering petals. The technique cleaved through the deathworm entirely, leaving its body in several pieces. Cyan stood amidst the remains, victorious. Later, on the battlefield, someone examined the monster's bloodstains and noted that the creature had not been dead for long. Jerkin, holding a torch, remarked from behind that the mana emanating from the area felt unusually intense. He speculated whether a demon might have been responsible for the carnage. Cyan's father, standing nearby, declared that such a possibility could not be ignored and immediately ordered the area to be inspected thoroughly. The soldiers were instructed to burn the corpse without delay. As they complied, Cyan's father scrutinized the sword traces left on the monster's body. A sense of familiarity crept over him as he silently wondered if his mind was playing tricks, questioning whether the peculiar marks were merely a coincidence. Jerkin, observing something of significance, called for his attention. In front of them lay the massive corpse of a deathworm. Shock rippled through the group. It was a deathworm, something that should have been nearly impossible to kill. The question of who could have accomplished such a feat lingered heavily in the air. Jerkin voiced a theory, considering whether the act could have been carried out by a certain organization. The presence of the demonic sword manifestation technique loomed over the discussion. Allowing Kiram to take control unleashed her full power, but doing so always came with risks. She could completely overpower Cyan if his guard slipped. At Cyan's location, he lay sprawled on his bed, thoroughly drained. Exhaustion coursed through his body, and he inwardly reflected on the reckless nature of relying on Kiram to defeat even a single foe. The toll on his body was undeniable, yet he acknowledged that drinking the blood of demonic beasts had fortified him. Had this been a month earlier, his body might not have withstood the strain. Kiram observed his state with an almost analytical air. Her tone carried a mix of curiosity and suspicion as she remarked on his behavior and abilities. She noted that while he appeared to be a child outwardly, his actions, words, and handling of her suggested otherwise. His mastery over the geography of the Lamia Valley and the mist sword techniques spoke to decades of experience, not the abilities of someone his apparent age. Furthermore, she had pieced together his earlier statements and confidently concluded that he was a regressor. Cyan responded with a lazy, indifferent expression, as though the revelation mattered little. He questioned whether he hadn't made it obvious enough already, given his earlier comments about dying before. Kiram reacted with a heavy silence, clearly unimpressed, before snapping in frustration that it was hardly obvious when he had explained nothing. Cyan's nonchalant attitude persisted as he brushed off her concerns, admitting that he lacked the motivation to elaborate. Kiram, undeterred, pressed on with her suspicions. She speculated that killing someone like Cyan would have been no small task, deducing that his death must have involved the owner of Duran Dark. She considered the possibilities, whether he had fallen in a duel or through betrayal, and confidently concluded it was the latter. Cyan inquired about Kiram's thoughts on the matter. Kiram responded by observing Cyan's disdain on Holy Sword. Kiram admitted he would be foolish if he couldn't discern Cyan's intentions, deducing that revenge must be Cyan's goal regardless of the circumstances. He warned Cyan to be mindful, threatening to eliminate him if he faltered or lost control. Without hesitation, Cyan immediately punched Kiram, sending her flying with a disdainful expression. He asserted that Kiram should know her place, emphasizing that he was not an idiot. Kiram spun silently, and Cyan smiled to himself, thinking that she hadn't changed at all. She remained the same as she was in his previous life. At that moment, Cyan left his camp to observe the surrounding atmosphere. He pondered the current chaos, noting that the day seemed unusually tumultuous. Emily approached him, addressing him as young master and informing him that it was his turn. When Cyan asked if something had happened, Emily replied with a worried expression, explaining that a high-level monster's corpse had been found near the entrance of the valley. Cyan realized she was referring to the deathworm. He wondered silently. Emily continued, mentioning that it had been a long time since there was a sighting of a high-level monster near the camps. Cyan, fearing that he might be discovered as the one who killed the deathworm, hastily asked if there was anything else. Emily appeared flustered. Cyan attempted to inquire further, asking if there had been any reports of suspicious individuals or anything related to him. However, their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jerkin, who approached from behind and informed Cyan that the Duke wanted to see him immediately. Feeling uneasy, Cyan silently evaluated the situation. He lamented that he couldn't manage the corpses of the monsters because soldiers had suddenly appeared, disrupting his plan to enjoy a quiet life before entering the academy. Now, at his father's camp, Cyan bowed respectfully and greeted his father as the youngest son of the Verts. He secretly hoped his father wouldn't recognize him. His father responded with a serious tone, requesting Cyan to sit down. Cyan contemplated what excuses he could offer if his father inquired about the previous night's incident. His father asked directly what he had been doing last night. Anxiously, Cyan replied that he had gone to bed early because he was tired. Upon hearing this, Williers thought that while Cyan claimed to have gone to bed early, the traces of swordsmanship suggested otherwise. He wondered if he was overthinking it. Feigning ignorance, Cyan asked why his father was asking. His father didn't respond, seeming skeptical that someone so young could have slain a deathworm. The Duke explained that he was sure Cyan had heard about the incident near the camps last night, and that they needed to investigate further. It appeared to be the work of a secret assassin organization. Cyan pretended not to know anything about it. His father continued, describing the organization as one that had existed since ancient times. Their goals were unknown, but they had assassinated countless nobles under the guise of purification. They were infamous for leaving behind a black mist wherever they appeared. However, one day, they had disappeared and were last seen 300 years ago. The corpse of the deathworm from the previous night was enveloped in black mist. Black mist is the trace left behind by air, the god of darkness, who is worshipped by the mist and serves as the source of their power. If Willier's assumptions are correct, the mist were responsible for slaying the deathworm and the other demonic beasts. Internally, Cyan marveled at his ability to precisely identify the culprit despite the organization having been last seen 3 centuries ago. His father advised that they couldn't determine the reason for the organization's sudden appearance, but cautioned Cyan to remain vigilant. He assured Cyan that he would notify the Empire about the incident and investigate further. Obediently, Cyan responded affirmatively, while also thinking that his father was likely to believe him. His father found it hard to believe that Cyan was involved with such an organization at his young age. He then declared that the conversation was over and inquired if Cyan had been informed about who was visiting that day. Cyan replied that he had heard His Majesty would be visiting, but was unsure if it was scheduled for that day. His father smiled and confirmed, expressing that he wanted to ask Cyan for a favor regarding the visit. Curious and anxious, Cyan asked for more details, but before his father could respond, a soldier interrupted, announcing the Emperor's arrival. Cyan's father went outside, kneeling and addressing the Emperor with respect as the king appeared on horseback, calling out to Williers. The king dismounted, approached Williers, and assisted him up, remarking that they were old friends and asking him not to be overly polite since he had the king's permission. Williers still felt some apprehension and greeted the emperor respectfully. The king's gaze then shifted to Cyan's position, prompting Cyan to bow and introduce himself as Cyan Vert, the youngest of the Verts. The king complimented Cyan, noting it was impressive for someone so young to reside in such a rough environment, and remarked that his children were definitely different from ordinary ones. Feeling more at ease, Cyan thought he was curious about the favor his father had mentioned, but realized his father merely wanted him to appeal as his son. Cyan reflected on how he had always been confined to the mansion in his past life. As the emperor visited, Emily nearby exclaimed that the emperor had arrived. Deeply touched by his father's trust, Cyan watched as the king called a servant to introduce someone else. From the drawn carriage emerged a beautiful woman who introduced herself as Erin Sevelis, the fifth princess of the empire. Cyan observed the princess, thinking of her as the tragic fifth princess. Before the emperor's arrival, Cyan and his father spoke at the camp, where his father informed him that he would need to escort the princess for the day. Cyan wondered about the significance of this task, but his father reassured him not to be surprised. He explained that Cyan just needed to keep her company since they were the same age, and that Cyan would see her again once he entered the academy. Cyan recalled seeing her at the academy in his past life, remembering observing her a few times between classes. His father remarked that there was no harm in becoming acquainted with someone from the royal family. He mentioned it wouldn't take long, but expressed a desire for Cyan to get along with her. Cyan silently evaluated the situation, feeling reluctant but understanding his father's intentions. He suspected that his father wished for them to develop a friendship similar to the one he had with the emperor. However, Cyan felt that his father had chosen the wrong person for such a friendship. He concluded that she could not become his friend, though he couldn't voice this thought as it pertained to a future only he was aware of. Annoyed, Cyan decided he would have to remain obedient for the time being. At that moment, images of the battlefield appeared. Erin inquired about the river's redness. Cyan explained that she must be referring to the Blood River, a stream running through the entirety of the Lamia Valley. There wasn't any complex reason for the water's redness. Demonic beasts, whether old or injured and unable to compete for survival, would instinctively leap into the Blood River. Their corpses and bodily fluids dissolved into the river, turning it red due to mana-induced decomposition. Erin, alarmed, sought confirmation if that was the sole reason for the river's condition. Cyan affirmed, adding that the demonic beasts also drank and washed in it, making it very disgusting and advising against entering. Erin grimaced and pressed further, inquiring about what lay at the end of the river. Cyan responded that it led to the demon realm. She questioned whether the demon realm was where the demons lived. With a mischievous smile, Cyan affirmed and added that if one continued following the river, they might even encounter the Demon King. Internally, Cyan thought that no sane person would pursue that path, finding amusement in teasing her. Suddenly, the sky signaled with a flare. Erin curiously inquired about the light. Cyan explained that it was the 3rd century post in the west, where a yellow light signifies incoming demonic beasts. Erin, somewhat fearful, questioned if there were demonic beasts nearby. Williers ordered the protection of His Majesty, stating that the Guardian Knight Division troops would accompany him to the 3rd century post in the west. The Emperor, wearing a cheerful expression, remarked to Williers that he did not intend to go on a hike and had been growing increasingly bored. Hesitant, Williers reluctantly complied. The king proclaimed that they would join the demonic beast raid, focusing on eliminating the beasts until the raid concluded. All the soldiers responded in unison with affirmation. Williers turned to Cyan and instructed that he join as well. Cyan promptly agreed. The princess incredulously questioned his ability to fight the demonic beasts. Cyan responded that he could, although he was still just supporting from the back, and advised seeking shelter. Erin hastily demanded to be taken along. Cyan wondered about the princess's insistence, and the attendant beside her attempted to restrain her. However, Erin persisted, stating that since Cyan was the same age as her, she could accompany him. Cyan warned that people died in that area, and that it was not a playground. Erin remained undeterred, declaring her intention to go and asserting that no one could stop her. Frustrated by her stubbornness, Cyan angrily summoned his knight, Jurkin. With a terrifying demeanor, Jurkin assured that he would substitute the royal knights and escort Her Highness to safety in the camps, initiating their departure. Erin, though somewhat scared, remained defiant and rebuked Cyan for treating her, a princess, in such a manner. Cyan, with a menacing look, leaned close to Aaron's face and warned that dozens of knights might die due to her stubbornness. He emphasized that a split-second decision could determine their fate in the war, questioning whether she could take responsibility for all those lives. Hearing this, Aaron felt so scared that she almost burst into tears. Cyan walked away, leaving her behind with the knights, and instructed her to go back if she was going to cry like a child, "Your Highness." At that moment, Aaron could only stand and watch Cyan leave in silence. At the center of the battlefield, a monster resembling a giant snail was devouring the foot soldiers. The soldiers screamed for defense, urging each other to fend off the beast, stand their ground, and not to fall back. Williers then appeared brandishing his sword and ordered the troops to get back into formation, protect his majesty, and slay all the monsters without sparing even a single one. Upon hearing his command, all the soldiers charged into battle with unwavering determination. Dion Sevelis, the emperor of the Wuzif Empire, had 2 wives. Diana Quizzle was his first wife, but she is now dead. Cassandra Nephilis is his second wife and is considered the prominent judiciary of the empire. The former Empress Dion gave birth to the first and second princesses, while the current Empress Cassandra gave birth to the third and fourth princes. However, Aaron Sevelis, the 5th princess, was a bastardized daughter born to a peasant mistress. People treated her as a scarecrow-like princess due to her mixed blood, but she did not care about how others perceived her. She fulfilled her duty as part of the royal family and devoted herself to her studies more than anyone else. However, she was framed for treason by those who resented her and was expelled from the royal family and the empire. Rumors spread that she died alone from a disease on an island, leading people to call her the tragic princess. It was believed that she could have lived a happy life had she not been greedy, and that it would have been better for her to live without any ambition. After recounting the story, Kiram questioned whether that was what Cyan's father had always told him in his past life. Cyan, who was currently engaged in battle with the monsters, responded that it was different, explaining that such was the nature of royal politics. At that moment, a giant snail was struck by powerful lightning, its body thoroughly cooked. Other giant snails suffered a similar fate. Cyan stood nearby, observing and evaluating that the emperor was skilled with his holy lightning ability. The king was slaughtering all the giant snails within his reach. Cyan noted that Emperor Dion was publicly recognized for his 8-star magic prowess, and that had he not become emperor, he probably would have been the Mage Association's head. Cyan understood that an intermediate-ranked demonic beast would pose no challenge, considering that being an emperor seemed to be his hobby. After a period of fighting within the camp, the emperor and Williers sat together, enjoying wine. The emperor mentioned that it had been a while since they had shared a drink. The emperor admitted feeling quite lonely, noting that he was the only one drinking. Williers apologized, explaining that he did not permit himself to drink on the front lines. At that point, the emperor changed the subject, recalling when Williers had inquired about the current atmosphere in the empire. He noted that there had been a recent increase in the assassination of nobles, which was causing widespread anxiety. Williers inquired whether there were any patterns to these assassinations. The emperor confirmed that all the victims were corrupt officials and that black mist had been present at each murder scene. Upon hearing this detail, Williers pondered thoughtfully. The emperor then asked if Williers had any ideas. Williers responded that he had discovered traces of black mist in the area the previous day, suggesting that the followers of Black Mist might be mobilizing again. The emperor agreed that this made sense, but emphasized the need for further investigation. He appreciated Williers' efforts in managing the situation, but expressed concern about the growing anxiety among the people. Additionally, the emperor mentioned another troubling matter. A noble was spreading rumors that blamed the 5th princess for the assassinations. Williers sought clarification, confirming that individuals were attempting to associate Princess Erin with the incidents. The emperor elaborated that he had been dismissing these claims as nonsense, but suspected that a group intended to exploit her. He then requested a personal favor from Williers, not as an emperor, but as a friend, to take care of Princess Erin if he were to die before Williers. Accepting the emperor's request with a serious demeanor, Williers assured that he would carry out the emperor's orders to completion. Pleased by Williers' assurance, the emperor thanked him. Heavy rain poured at the campsite. Inside Cyan's tent, Emily felt frustrated and questioned him, prompting him to respond curtly, indicating that was all he had to say. Emily firmly countered, expressing that Cyan's actions were unacceptable, stating that as the princess, ending the escort would jeopardize any chances of marriage. Feeling overwhelmed by Emily's criticism, Cyan thought to himself that she might have thought he was planning a date. He then left the tent, telling Emily that he trusted her to manage things in his absence. Emily voiced her concern, asking if Cyan was heading to training despite the severe rain. Cyan reassured her not to worry and advised her not to stay up waiting for him either. As Cyan was about to depart, a girl cloaked in rain stood outside his tent, waiting. Puzzled by her presence, Cyan observed the stranger while Emily, filled with fear, asked who she was. The stranger then removed her hood, revealing herself as Princess Erin, and inquired where Cyan was intending to go. Erin approached Cyan and requested a conversation, apologizing if he was busy. Quickly changing her demeanor, Emily welcomed Erin warmly. Outside Cyan's camp, not only soldiers from his family were present, but also royal soldiers. Erin inquired how long Cyan had been there. Cyan responded that it had been about a month, and then curiously asked her the reason for her visit. Erin sensed something slightly ominous behind her and asked if they could be excused for a moment. Cyan turned to Emily and instructed her to go outside for a bit. Before leaving, Emily agreed and wished them a good time together. With everything quiet, Cyan thought to himself that spending time with a 10-year-old wouldn't be enjoyable, correcting his own thought by noting he was 40 in this situation. Erin hesitantly apologized for her earlier behavior, expressing that she felt she hadn't acted as a princess should. Cyan responded politely, assuring her there was no need to worry and apologize for being rude. Erin smiled and reciprocated, saying she would have done the same in his place. Her smile faded, and a slightly saddened expression took over her face as she continued, noting that Cyan was acknowledged by many people, unlike herself, and that he was much more mature. Observing Erin's change in demeanor, Cyan recognized the kind of personality she possessed. Erin then expressed her desire, mentioning that Cyan was entering the academy as well and suggested they become friends. Understanding her suggestion, Cyan interrupted her before she could finish. His face turned serious, with a hint of intimidation, as he firmly declined, stating that he didn't believe he could be of any help to her. This response made Erin feel fearful for a moment. Cyan clarified his stance, indicating that if Erin was here to make friends, she should leave. Erin attempted to persuade Cyan, explaining that she just wanted them to be on good terms. She remarked on his harshness, questioning if he also thought she was merely a shell of a princess. Without receiving a response to her difficult question, Erin continued, acknowledging that there was likely no benefit in being friends with her and apologized for wasting his time. Deciding to leave, she stated that she had been short-sighted in thinking they could at least talk, and remarked that Cyan was completely different from what Sir Rochelle had said. Upon hearing the mention of his betraying brother, Cyan became visibly unsettled, deeply pondering the implications of the words he had just heard. In that moment of intense distress, he lost control and tightly gripped Erin's hand, desperate to prevent her from leaving. Concerned for his well-being, Erin inquired about the cause of his distress. Cyan responded with a cold demeanor, questioning how Erin had come to know about his brother. Fearfully, Erin explained that she had become acquainted with the shell during her tour of the Royal Academy the previous year. During that time, the shell had advised her not to concern herself with others' opinions and to focus solely on fulfilling her duties as a princess. Upon hearing this revelation, Cyan comprehended the gravity of the situation. He thought to himself that he understood Eschel's personality, the demonic bastard's nature, better than anyone else. The plan to undermine Princess Erin had commenced as soon as she had met Eschel. Cyan felt a surge of fury but remained worried as he issued a warning to Erin. However, his warning was abruptly interrupted when their camp was suddenly shaken by an unexpected and violent disturbance. Emily rushed into the camp from outside, urgently informing them that the young master needed to flee immediately. At that precise moment, a massive log crashed down onto Cyan's tent from above with such speed that its approach went completely unnoticed. The entire camp was obliterated in an instant, leaving devastation in its wake. Fortunately, Emily had been outside the attack range, and thus escaped death unscathed. Standing before them was a colossal monster, holding a tree branch, towering menacingly. Panic ensued as people began shouting to one another, cursing and exclaiming that the young master's tent was under attack, urgently urging others to verify his safety. Emily, overwhelmed by fear, crouched on the ground, her heart racing as she desperately called out for her young master. Meanwhile, the shock of the attack had reached Willier's camp, causing both the Emperor and Williers to become increasingly worried and highly uncertain about the unfolding events. A soldier entered the camp to report the dire situation, and the Emperor's face darkened with deep concern as he inquired about the details of the report. The soldier explained that advanced-ranked demonic beasts had ambushed the rear camps in the border regions and believed that the princess was present during the attack. In response to this alarming news, the Emperor urgently ordered all members of the Imperial Army to head to the rear camps without delay to ensure the princess's safety. The Emperor pondered the perplexing situation, questioning how the princess had come to be in the rear camps and whom she might be intending to meet in such a dangerous and volatile area. The narrative then shifted to the area under attack by the monsters, where two ogres emerged from the chaos, wreaking havoc and causing further destruction. Cyan, having survived the initial attack, was now hiding and carefully assessing the increasingly dire and chaotic situation around him. He observed that deathworms and ogres were typically creatures that resided only in the deeper, more secluded regions of the valley. Their unexpected presence in the rear camps indicated that something significant had changed in the dynamics of the area. Cyan wondered whether this change was a direct consequence of his own actions or involvement. Emily cried out in anguish, expressing that she had believed the young master to be truly dead and vowed never to leave his side again, her voice filled with joy. Returning to the time of the attack, Cyan had swiftly jumped off, managed to hold on to Aaron, and dodged to the side to avoid the fatal blow from the giant log. He silently evaluated his own strength and capabilities, recalling that in his earlier days, he had even killed the Demon King, which suggested that he was not about to perish to what he considered a mere troll-like creature. Aaron, clearly worried, asked whether the knights in the camps were safe. Emily reassured her by stating that there was no need to worry, as the knights were exceptionally strong and well-trained in combat. Aaron, in a moment of intense emotion, hugged her face and cried, believing that this dire situation would not have occurred had she not come here. The knights accompanying them reassured Aaron, affirming that they were all right and that it was their duty as the Knights of the Empire to protect her at all costs, emphasizing their unwavering and steadfast commitment to her safety and well-being. The remaining knight also smiled confidently and affirmed that he was right, assuring the Highness that they would protect her with their lives. Suddenly, Cyan's expression turned serious as he warned the knights to move. The knights didn't grasp his meaning and remained unaware of the imminent danger approaching from behind. In the next moment, the troll's large hand grasped one knight's body, and with a single grip, the knight was killed. Cyan stepped forward to protect Aaron and instructed her to step back. Seeing Cyan's appearance, the ogre seemed to recognize something. Cyan immediately realized that the ogre had recognized him. Upon identifying its target, the troll threw the knight's body aside. Cyan urgently told everyone he would distract the troll, urging them to flee with the princess. Emily agreed without hesitation, not worrying about Cyan. She carried Aaron and questioned the other knight actions, prompting him to leave. Cyan thought angrily, realizing that Emily was eager to leave. The troll raised both hands to attack Cyan, who prepared to counter. In the next moment, Cyan's sword cut through the troll's arm. After the attack, Cyan wondered why all the advanced-ranked demonic beasts were attracted to him, feeling as though they could smell something on him. Kiram chuckled maliciously, explaining Cyan of drinking the blood of countless demonic beasts to become strong, explaining that it was the reason Cyan had killed so many of them. Kiram added that it would be strange if the beasts did not come for him. Cyan urgently asked why Kiram was revealing this information just now, to which Kiram smirked and replied that Cyan had forgotten her true purpose. Before Kiram could answer, Cyan squeezed her shadow form, and the magic sword appeared. Kiram complained about Cyan's actions, pleading to be treated better. Cyan demanded silence, stating he didn't care how many monsters approached him. After making his declaration, Cyan rushed towards the troll. The troll threw a punch at him, but Cyan dodged and approached its head, cutting it off. The troll's heavy body fell to the ground. Cyan declared that now that no one was watching, they should go sip on some advanced-ranked demonic beast blood. In front of him stood a crowd of large monsters. Kiram excitedly announced that it was going to be a feast, but then he noticed something and called for caution as a large dragon with a purple body appeared. Cyan exclaimed that it was a devil dragon, and its roar echoed around them. Kiram confirmed that it was still a baby and added that the dragon also smelled Cyan. Cyan smiled maliciously, thinking it didn't matter why the dragon was there. The demonic sword manifestation caused Cyan and Kiram's spirit power to merge. What mattered was that Cyan wasn't missing out on a chance like this. With a confident and intimidating face, Cyan declared that they had to catch the dragon. Kiram objected, stating that they had to eat it. On another side of the camp, a monster was attacked by several golden lightning bolts. The Emperor asked Williers if this was the last one. Williers replied that it seemed so. The Emperor then inquired about the princess and Williers' son. Williers responded that he couldn't find their traces past the tent. The Emperor apologized, assuring Williers that it was fine and understanding that he was surely worried about his son too. Trusting in Cyan, Williers replied that there was no need to worry about his son, emphasizing that what mattered right now was the princess. The Emperor thought that was cold, but Williers affirmed that a Vert should know to watch out for himself. At that moment, someone came to report to the Emperor that they had found the princess. The Emperor asked for confirmation, and immediately after, Erin rushed in calling for her father. The Emperor inquired about her condition and whether she was hurt anywhere. Erin, worried, said they needed to hurry to save him. The Emperor asked whom they needed to save. Erin explained that because of her, he was in danger. The Emperor asked her to calm down and to tell him what was going on. Williers stepped forward and addressed Cyan's maid. Emily replied, with a terrifyingly dark face, that she is. Williers demanded to know if something had happened to Cyan. Emily, frightened, thought she was scared as she had never seen the Duke look so scary before. Trembling, she stuttered that the young master acted as bait to give them time to run away. Hearing this, Williers' eyes sharpened as he looked at Emily. The royal soldier next to them immediately said he remembered where Cyan was last. He added that if the Emperor just gave an order, he would go with others to save the young master. The Emperor urged him to do so. Contrary to everyone's expectations, Williers remained silent for a moment before stating firmly that they would not proceed with the proposed course of action. His decision left many puzzled. The Emperor questioned him again, asking with disbelief if Williers was serious. With composure, Williers explained that the immediate priority was addressing the current situation. If the camps fell, the demonic beast would invade the empire. The place had to be reconstructed immediately to prevent further loss of life. Emily, though terrified, found the courage to question what would happen to the young master. With a cold demeanor, Williers stated that Cyan had fulfilled his duty by aiding the princess's evacuation, demonstrating what it meant to be a Vert. Hearing this, the princess felt a surge of guilt, wondering why such sacrifices had to be made because of her yet again. Their discussion was interrupted by a piercing cry from above. Erin turned her attention skyward, recognizing the sound, a dragon. Above them, a dragon soared majestically, and soon she spotted Cyan clinging desperately to one of its legs. Cyan's face bore a defeated expression, tears streaming down his cheeks as he struggled to hold on.